In this section of the videos, we're going to talk about several different methods for filling in the gaps between the buildings. And I mean, as you know, when the pieces and the platform were built, they had to leave quite a bit of space in between the buildings by the nature of how they're cast. They couldn't get them very close, or there's a good chance they wouldn't fit at all. And that left us with quite a few gaps to fill. And it's really important you fill them because nothing looks more distracting and more irritating to my eye than seeing those big gaps. So we'll talk about several different ways to fill them, and some easier than others. And you can at least take some of my leads on those and maybe try some techniques of your own. But we'll go through those. And we're going to start with filling in the gaps around the station, and then using a caulk basically, and then we'll show you other techniques from there. In this set of videos, we're going to be installing the buildings into the platform, and we're going to be shimming them up to get them up to the right height so that they all are about the same height relative to the roadway. And we're going to be filling in all the gaps between the buildings and the roadway and between all the different pieces. This is one of the steps in the process that's going to make the collection look clean and consistent with the artwork and the quality that Olszewski has given us. These gaps really are ugly and distracting from the collection, so really important we fill those in. And I'll give you several techniques for doing that in this part of the video. But the key to making this all work out is the roadway and where it's placed, because all the buildings are placed relative to it. And you have to make sure it is in the absolute perfect position when you start. Like I said, because everything's going to be relative to it. And we've already talked about that a little bit when we put the train station in place, because we had to locate it based on our first rough positioning of the roadway. But now it's time to get the fine tuning in. And there's really two steps to that. One is to put in the Opera House and City Hall. Can't really see City Hall. There it is. And to put them in their rough positions, then drop the street in and start really paying attention to this piece. This is the piece that goes right in front of the station, and you really want it to be symmetric here. This gap, really want that gap to be pretty symmetric, because even when it's filled, you're going to see a little bit of this space. So I like to make sure that this gap is consistent with this gap. So that kind of positions it this way. And then when you push this up against the roadway, you'll see that it's going to have a little bit of slop, because the radiuses here are not quite the same as the radius of the roadway. So just try to center that. And that's going to push the roadway into a centering position. And then check the two wing pieces to make sure that you have about the same gap on the walkways on both sides. Now with that rough positioning in, or that positioning in, now go over to the castle, and I'll move the camera. Now on the castle side, there's a couple of alignments we're trying to get right. The first alignment is on the back of the castle, and what you're trying to do here is to make sure that the back opening gap matches the gap in the platform where the train track goes, and that's going to center the castle this way. Now once you've done that, now try to zoom in on this, you're going to see a line here in the roadway, and that should match the line in the center of the entrance to the castle, and that's going to position the roadway this way. So the roadway has been positioned in this axis by the alignments at the train station side. It's going to be aligned this way on this axis by the alignment of the castle. And having done that, you should be pretty well lined up with the roadway. I also tend to put in the Triton's Gardens, the Astor River, and Plaza Inn in the road into the roadway at this stage, just to make sure that something didn't get bunched up or there isn't some other weirdness in this particular platform we don't know about. All the platforms are different, all the pieces are different. You know, you do have to be, you know, just a little bit weary of making sure this is all going to line up before you start gluing stuff down. All right, so with all of the alignments done, I'm going to zoom in on the first of our problem areas. This is, you can see where we are. This is the opera house. There's a train station. And where this piece meets the opera house is a problem because we can't pull the opera house far enough out to fill in this gap next to the roadway. And we have this gap here to worry about. We have this gap around the roadway to worry about. And the problem is the interference of the piece with the opera house right here. And this is a pretty common problem area for the layouts that we've run into. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out in my shop and I'm going to grind back this piece so that the opera house can move forward and fit and fill this gap. You know, you can use a saw. I'm just going to use a sander and just take out a little bit of this gap to make these two fit in. And it's really essential we get that right, because this is the first and most important part that we're going to attach permanently into the platform. So take your time to get this angle right, to get these pieces sit right, to get the opera house to pull up into the street, and with that first adjustment, that'll be what'll put everything else into motion with filling in the gaps. To assist with this cut, I've made a couple of tape marks here of how much I'm going to remove from that piece, and you can see it's actually quite a bit of material we're going to pull off of that to make this to fill in that gap. I mean, all I did to do that was I just lifted out the opera house piece and I just lifted it out and positioned it where I believed it should go, and taped in the line. And so that's where we're going to make our cut. Oops, sorry. That's where I'm going to make my cut, and I'll be back in a second. Okay, so now with the cut made, we can see that the alignment is much better. There's still a little bit of a gap here, but that's negligible, really. That's mainly the problem with the way the radius of the opera house is cut. So that really is as good as it gets for this kind of fit. And so now we'll go ahead and epoxy down this piece onto the platform right where it sits. And with that will set the position of the roadway for all the other pieces. So get out your two-part epoxy it down, and you're good. Now, the one thing you have to be careful of when you attach this piece is make sure it's the right height with the platform. And on this one, looks like I'm going to have to raise this up just a bit to make sure it fits the front of the train station. Otherwise, it'll look like a step. So I'm going to raise this up about 1.5 millimeters, and then attach it, and then we'll be ready to keep working. Alright, so we've got this piece attached. Now, to attach it, I decided not to use epoxy this time because it was really too much height to correct. So instead I used more of that magic tape that I used to attach the electronics. This is that exterior grade double stick tape by 3M. So yeah, look at my installing the electronics section of the video to see what the tape is. But it was a perfect height, and so now we have a really good transition of height all around the station up through this area, and that will fill really nicely, as I'll show you a little bit later. And so that looks good. Now next we're going to attach these two street pieces, the ones that are on either side of Main Street, and those will permanently establish the location of the roadway. And I'm going to use the same procedure with the tape again, I think, to both raise it up to be flush with the street bed and to secure it to the platform. Now, in this case, if I look straight down, you're going to see a gap between the building and the roadway. Don't worry about that. We're going to fill that with balsa and paint it a little bit later. It's most important that this line be right. That's the line where the two roadways join together. So make sure that's right. Make sure that back here that the roadway is sitting up against the building. And by pushing that up against the building, by squaring that against the roadway, that will establish the location for this piece. So just use the tape to get it to the right height and to attach it, and do that on the other side too with the same. Well, I'll talk about the other side. I'll talk about the other side in a few minutes. But let's get this one in first. So now we can see that side of the street now finished, and see this really flat and flush with the roadway. That's as good as that gets. And actually it's pretty good. And like I said, we'll fill this gap in a little bit later with balsa. Now let's talk about this side. This side is a little bit more tricky because you've got the train track detail to deal with. That has to be perfect, really. so that's going to be one of your alignments that you have to worry about. In fact, really that's the only alignment you have to worry about. Make sure that this edge is flush, and that the train tracks line up, and then everything else should pull into place. I do try to see if I can't get the gap between the City Hall and this part of the roadway to be as small as possible. That'll save you some time later, but for the most part, this is the key thing to get right. And otherwise, it's the same thing we did over there. Just build up some tape or whatever else you're going to use to attach it, and get it the right height, and stick it down. So anyone who's done painting before knows that the most important part of the job is the preparation, and here we're going to be filling in the gaps around the train station, and I'm using painter's tape to mask off the area around the gap. And I mean, it's pretty easy. I mean, I'm sure you've probably done this before if you've done any sort of painting. Basically, just drop a piece of the tape on. Try to center it over the gap. Press it down, we're good. Get a nice seal. And then just run a knife along the inside edge. And that's it. End up with a nice clean edge to drop the filler in. And so you're going to do that all the way around the station, and then we'll put in the filler here in a second. Alright, so I've been filling for a while, and I finished the front of the train station, and I pulled the tape off. And so now I'm going to continue doing the Main Street side of the station. And I'll show you how this filler goes in. On this part of the station, I'm just using a spackle. It's a vinyl spackle, now this will dry quite hard, and that's okay because this part of the platform will never come apart. It means we'll never remove this piece or the station, so it's okay to use a permanent or semi-permanent bonder filler in this area. And for other areas where we use different types of fillers, I just like this one in this area because it dries fast, and it doesn't shrink very much. So you just take a blob of it and push it down into the gap. You need to push quite a bit of it down in there to make sure you have a nice thick area underneath so it won't crack later or pull apart or fall in. And of course we're going to paint this all later too, which will also help it. Anyway, just smoosh a bunch of it down in there, and then when you get enough of it in, then you just come back and straighten it out. And it's like spackling a wall. I mean, if you've done any sort of paint preparation, you'll know how to do this. And you just keep working your way around the gap, filling the stuff in. And as soon as you have it in, pull the tape up. Because if it dries with the tape on, it creates a mess. And so be sure as soon as it's in, pull the tape up. And then afterwards, if you have some little anomalies or areas you don't like, you can always come back later and fix them. The nice thing about the spackle is it's water soluble, and so if you get anything on the table where it doesn't belong, or if you need to clean something up or change something, you can just with a little bit of water and a damp rag. So that's really it. Just work your way around the table and work your way around the gap and fill it in, and then we'll go on to the next gap. All right, so while we're letting the caulking and the train station dry, we'll now do the town square and the hub. Now the town square and the hub both have the same mounting challenges, and we're going to use the same technique for both of them. I'll just show you the town square because it's the more difficult of the two. The first thing you'll notice is that it needs quite a bit of lifting to get up to the right level, especially with our extra thick roadbed. As I mentioned before, that for some reason was manufactured extra thick. That means that we'll have to raise up all the buildings a little bit higher than normal. So in this case, we're going to take a couple of these black round thingies that Tolshevsky has provided, and we're going to need to use 1.5 of them. So I've cut down 3 of them to a half size, so that'll give us 1.5 of them in each of the 3 corners. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just stick those down. Now you can use the self-adhesive backing on the little black guys. The glue they have is not very strong, and they can come loose, but you can use them if you like. And then I'm going to take some of our gray double stick tape, put that between the two to make sure we get an extra good grip, holding the little one, the half high one, to the full high one. Push those together, and we'll get the 3 corners in, and then we'll set it in place. Okay, the 1.5 spacers are in all 3 corners, and we'll double check the height to make sure we like the height. Try to keep all the curbs consistent. So you can see that it's definitely a curb. One of the trouble with the gaps is that you don't want to have people confused about what's a curb and what's a gap, right? So I exaggerate the curb height a little bit. In scale, this curb would be about 18 inches high, maybe 2 feet high. It's way high for scale, but it looks right to your eye. And so that's about the same height as this edge in front of the train station. And that's the same curb height they'll use throughout the entire display. But make sure you like it, because you can't really change it later, especially with how this piece and the hub get installed. All right, so now we're on to the next step. All right, so this next step is pretty important that you get right for the way that we're doing this. What I've done is I've wrapped the piece in saran wrap, or whatever other cling wrap you have, you can get your hands on. The idea is to wrap it with something that will insulate the piece from the caulk that we're going to put in. We're going to be installing a caulk gasket, like caulk seal around this piece, because frankly, this is the only way to get the seal look even remotely right, is to use a caulking material like this stuff. at least that I've been able to find. And so we wrap the piece in plastic wrap so we can get the piece out again. Then we just squeeze in the sealer around the piece and wait for it to cure, which takes about 2 days in this installation. It takes a little longer than usual because the air doesn't really get to the sealant very easily with all the roadway and the saran wrap around it. So I'll show you how that goes when we do the sealing. But before you start the sealing, make sure that the piece is perfectly centered in its hole, and make sure that the saran wrap itself is sticking to the piece. These edges are actually slightly concaved, and so the saran wrap wants to float away from them. So you have to sometimes use tape or something to pull the saran wrap into the edge so it stays next to it. And also make sure that the saran wrap around the edge is smooth. Sometimes it wants to bunch up a little bit, and that will prevent the sealer from going in properly. So, all right. So I'll show you how the sealer goes in next. All right. So we're ready to put the sealer in, but first you need to put the masking tape around the edge to prevent the sealer from getting on the street. That sealer stuff's going to go everywhere, and we really don't want it touching the street. So I've just put some tape on, and I got my knife, and we'll just cut out the shape of the hole where the town square is going to go. And like I said before, this is exactly the same process we're going to use on the hub. So you get a chance to practice on one of them. The hub is a little bit easier to do, so you may want to do it first just to get the hang of how this process works. Alright, good. It's a nice edge. And that's what we'll be using to apply the adhesive against. Okay, well I'm just laying a bead of caulk, I'm actually forcing the caulk down to the gap as best I can, making sure that the saran wrap doesn't move. And you just work your way around the piece, forcing the sealer in, or the caulking agent in, to the gap. And when you get those thick gaps like that one, you have to put in quite a bit of the stuff. Okay. Now this step is really, this is the money step here. This is the one you have to get right. And that is, you have to take a straight edge, smoothing tool. I'm using the same one I used for the train station, and just get a real smooth edge along the base of the town square opening and the wrapper around the saran wrap itself. If you can get a nice clean edge there now, it'll save you a lot of cleanup later. Okay, and then now that you're happy with your line, now just pull the tape up. Again, you have to pull the tape up pretty early in the process because you really don't want to have the sealer glue to the, or you want to have the caulking glue the tape down, because believe me, that makes a mess to clean up later. Alright, and let that cure for about 2 days, and then you're going to lift the building out. You'll have to lift the building out. When you lift the building out, I'll show you later how to do that, but when you lift the building out, the idea is to undo the saran wrap, peel it away from the platform, and pull it out, peel it out away from the town hall, the town square thing, and then lift the town square out, leaving the saran wrap sticking to the caulk. And then once the building's out, or once the town square is out, then you can pull the saran wrap away from the caulk, leaving just the caulk. And that way now the town square can go in and out of the piece in and out of the platform easily. Well, it's been about 24 hours since I installed the caulk, and it's set up pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and try to pull this guy out of here because I've got a lot of work to do, and I'm tired of waiting. So the unwrapping procedure is pretty delicate, especially since the caulk is still a little bit damp. What we have to do is to cut the piece out of the saran wrap. And the reason why we're going to do that is so that the saran wrap is going to stay put, hopefully. Oops, sorry. Hopefully the saran wrap is going to stay put as we pull the piece out, because we don't want the saran wrap to come loose, or we don't want the saran wrap to try to slide out with the piece, because that'll tear up the caulk until the caulk has cured more. Now the caulk, in my experience, won't completely cure until you get the piece out. So you know, it's okay to wait for 24, 36 hours and then go ahead and remove it. Now it turns out this wrap is not particularly easy to cut. In fact, this piece here is giving me a particular pain in the neck, so there we go, that's better. Okay, so now we're going to peel it. Make sure we got it all exposed. Alright, and now we lift out the piece gently, being careful not to disturb the caulk. Okay, so now that we have the piece out, now we should be able to unpeel the saran wrap from the caulk. And I'm trying to find a place that's going to come loose here for me. And this one is sticking a little bit, so it's probably a good idea that I pulled it up now, because it's only going to stick more later. There we go. Once you get an edge to come loose, then the rest of it will come loose. Okay, I'm not happy with how the edge is coming up, so I'm going to give that just a little bit more time to cure. And you're going to have areas like this one here, which I didn't do a very good job of scraping off the top material. It's a left little flange here. We'll cut that one off later once it cures, so I'm not going to worry about that right now. So anyway, you get the idea of how it comes off and what it'll look like when it's done. And I'll come back in a few minutes and show you what it looks like when it's all cleaned up. Alright, so I've gotten the rest of the plastic out. It was just hung up on a little wet spot there. But you can see what the edge is going to look like. It's going to have a nice smooth edge to it that's going to fill in a rather large gap. Although it looks kind of messy, this is the cleanest look you're going to get from making this particular gap corrected. And before you paint it, you're going to touch this up a little bit with a knife and a little bit more of the sealer if you want. But this edge is about as good as it gets. You know, the thing about the edges on the table, all the gaps, you're not going to get them perfect. There's really no need to even try to get them perfect, but you're just trying to fill in the really obvious ones that your eye is drawn to immediately when you look at the piece. And this is certainly a more than adequate filling approach for both the town square and for the hub. I'll show you the hub here in a second. Here's the hub after it's been filled. The hub was a lot easier to do because it's completely circular and it leaves a cleaner line to it. And here you can see how much of the how much of the caulk I actually put in. You actually have to put in quite a bit so that it's firm enough to stay put. If you don't put enough of the caulk in, then it'll just pull off, and when you pull the plastic off, or later when you pull the piece out. So now that you have the piece out, be sure to let this thing cure for a good 3 or 4 days, 5 days, so it gets nice and dry. Otherwise, what's going to happen when you put your piece back in, it's going to stick to it. And then you run the risk of pulling the piece out and having to pull the caulking with it. So yeah, be sure to leave a good 4 or 5 days of good curing time so this gets nice and dry. And then you'll do whatever finishing work needs to be done. This edge actually looks really good, so I'm not going to have to do any finishing on this one. But then you'll just paint it with the light road shade of paint, and you're good to go. And so we'll move on to other gap filling methods. Now we're going to talk about shimming up the buildings, and the building shimmings are going to happen in 2 steps. One, the first step is to get them the right height, and then the second step, which we'll do later, is to fill in the gaps between the buildings. But this first step is important to get right first as we start to position all the buildings in the platform. Now here I've got 4 of those little rubber feet that Olszewski provides with the platform, and I've been cutting on these a little bit because the building is sitting up too high with just the standard feet. So I've cut them down a little bit, and at least some of them, and so we'll do a little test fit here. All right. Now on this piece, you really want to make sure that the street side is right, because that's the part everybody's going to see. Now if the rest of it's not quite perfect, that's fine, but the street side's got to be right. And I'm pretty happy with this edge back here, but it's a little wiggly. I need to fix that. This part though is too low where it hits the street here, so I need to bring that up. And it's inconsistent how much I need to bring it up. I'm going to bring it up about 1 of these little tape courses, and what I'm going to use to bring it up is this same gray tape we've been using on the platform, because it's pretty thick. So I'm going to bring it up 1 course of that tape. And I'm just going to cut it so it's a little square. Pull the building out. Take the little piece here, and I'm going to build it up 1 course of this tape. All right. Put the foot back. And I'm going to take the other foot. I'm going to build it up I'm going to build it up a course too. To knock that rocking out, I probably want to put 2 courses in this foot on this back corner course. So I'm just going to put 1 and fold it over. So that should put that corner fine. I'm going to attach these 2 in where they belong. Okay, now with any luck, the piece will sit down, it'll be the right height, and it'll be nice and centered. And the street side is fine. It's a good compromise between the heights. That's good. Yeah, I like that. That's good. Now you notice on this piece that this corner back here sits up pretty high. When it's sitting in there, there's really nothing you can do about that. And what that means is you're going to have to take this piece and you're going to have to cut out a little bit of this corner. I think they must have known that when they made it, because if you look at the door, it's actually got a little panel there, specifically to make that cut. So you just take your Dremel, make that little notch, and then that will fit in there perfectly. And so that building is good. Now, so you're gonna repeat this process of just leveling it out, make sure the front is perfect and the backs are consistent. You're going to do that for all the pieces. But there are some special cases, and I'll point those out as in the next set of video. Here's one of our problem spots for shimming out the buildings. We're here at the Cook Corner building, and the way that the Plaza Pavilion and Tiki Room piece fits in the platform with Cook Corner is that if the back of Cook Corner were down properly, then the plaza can't slide far enough forward to the street. So the only way to get the plaza to slide in far enough is to actually raise the back of Cook Corner up. And I've done several of these platforms, and it seems like when it's right, the top of the back of Cook Corner will be just slightly above the top of the plaza, like you see it here. Like I said, if it was sitting down all the way down like the other buildings, and I mean you can see the difference here. The camera. If you look here, you can see how much it's raised up, how much the Cook Corner building has been raised up. It's about an extra 2 or 3 courses of the gray tape. Is how much it's raised up. And with that raised up, then the Plaza Pavilion can go up against the street, and it's fine. Yeah, it looks fine when it's done. No one's going to really notice this little step here. Well, you can just describe it to people as a step if they notice it, and they won't, I tell you. And also when you have done that, it also coincidentally makes the roof line of the Cook Corner piece line up better with the Penny Arcade piece, so that the roof lines line up better on the back. So it's a little weird to have to raise the back up so high, but when you do, it makes all the alignments right. So that's one of the weirdnesses you got to deal with. So now that we've got all of the buildings all shimmed up to the proper height, now we're going to shim the gaps between the buildings that we didn't already do with the caulks. And we're going to use the Balsa mechanism that Olszewski describes on his website, because it's easy and it works good. And so what we're going to do is we're going to measure, in this case we're going to fill this gap between the orbiter and Triton's Garden. And we're going to just measure a piece of balsa about that long and measure the gaps at the front and the back. Put our tool in there. Then we're going to cut a strip of balsa to fit in there and see what happens. So here I've marked out my piece of balsa and going to just cut it, and it's pretty easy. The balsa cuts really easily. Just use a nice sharp knife. Run your knife down the edge of it. Now when you cut this edge here, you have to make sure that it cuts pretty clean, because you're going to see this edge up against the street. And the balsa does not like being cut across the grain, so that one's fine. Let's see how it fits. Alright, there's my gap. I cut this piece first, and I laid it in there. And I wasn't entirely happy how it fit. I had just a little bit too much slack back here in the back. So I cut a second piece. I'm a lot happier with how that one fits. This one slides in there perfect. And that fills the gap perfectly. Very happy with that piece. And as you work your way around the buildings, that's all you have to do really, is just cut out a little piece of the stuff, slide it in there, check it for fit, how you like it, and it's just kind of a tedious process. Takes a little bit of time, but believe me, when it's done and it's painted, it makes a huge difference, because your eye is going to be drawn to the piece and the art itself, and not from these gaps that are sitting around all the buildings. So I'll finish those splices up, and I'll show you the tricky parts, because there are a couple tricky spots on the platform that you need to deal with. So now you've got all of your various shim pieces all cut, And here I'm next to Carnation, and I'm just going to, I've put the contact cement, the same stuff we used on the train, on both the edge of the building and the balsa. And it's pretty obvious, you just stick it on there, hopefully you get it right the first time. And on it goes. Not much to it. Now up here I'm using the contact cement. You might prefer to use something a little less permanent. I've also used double stick tape successfully. In the thin cellophane type, not the thick stuff we've been using. But the thin cellophane type of double stick tape seems to work okay. It's not as good as the heavier duty stuff I'm using here, but it's not bad. And anyway, just stick all the shims on. With the contact cement, you do have to be a little careful and make sure you're pretty close when you get them stuck on the first time. And so just work your way around the buildings. There's, like I said, a couple tricky spots. I'll show you those in a second here. All right, let me point out some of the harder areas to fill and with the balsa, and I'll give you just some hints about how I did it. So one of the big areas is here next to the Plaza Inn, this big gap between these buildings. I have no idea how that gap got so big in the design of the table, but it is significant. It's almost half an inch. And here I used a little thicker piece of balsa to be stronger so it wouldn't move around. But you basically cut it like all the others, but it's just a big piece, and you have to attach it pretty securely. I attached it to the Plaza Pavilion piece, but it doesn't really matter. But that's a big one. There's another big gap between outside of Plaza Inn. There's another big gap between the Tiki Room and the Adventureland piece that needs to get filled. Same thing. And there's one other spot. I mean, for the most part, you're really just filling in sections like this one here, next to the Magic Shop here and the Opera House, and you're just filling these in, and it's really straightforward. And so for the most part, that's all the filling you're doing. But like I said, there's one more tricky one that I'll point out. Now here we're looking at the gap between the Penny Arcade and the Candy Palace, and here you have to fill in, of course, the gap at the street level. But there was also a large gap left on the roof line that looked bad, and so so I filled in the roof piece and also a little piece on the front wall, just to make these look more aligned. This is really the only gap you have on the roof lines of all the pieces fitting together, and so it's nice to tidy that one up. So, but with those caveats, the balsa is really an easy trick to use, and works well, and paints easy, and you can do that. You can fill in all the gaps that need balsa within a couple hours. So now I'll move on to the final gap filling technique, the clump foliage. Okay, so the last trick we're going to show about filling in gaps is using this stuff called clump foliage, and this is made by a company called Woodland Scenics. You can get this at any hobby or train store. They make it in different colors. I use a combination of medium green and dark green when I'm filling in the gaps. And it's great for filling in gaps like the ones you have in the back of the buildings. Then on the street side of the buildings, you pretty much have to use the street and the balsa technique. But on the backs, pretty much all the buildings line up against one of these hedgerow things that Olszewski's put in, and that makes this clump foliage stuff perfect to fill in a gap. It goes in fast, it's easy. You don't have to worry about cutting anything. You just take a clump of it out of the bag. Just take a screwdriver or a pencil or pen or something and just stuff it in there. It goes really fast. you know, there's the nice thing about the clump foliage is it kind of makes a very natural looking hedgerow, and it's a really neat trick. Something that, of course, trained hobbyists have used for decades. But I've got my hand in front of the camera again. But you get the idea. You just work your way along and stuff the stuff in there, and it's really easy. Now I'll use this around the back of all of the buildings, including the back of the Aster Orbiter. I like to cover up that white wall back there. In fact, I'll show you that in a second. Oh, and then of course around the back of pretty much all the buildings to fill things in. And that's by far the easiest of the filling mechanisms that I use around the buildings. And it really sets it off, really finishes the piece up. It really makes it look a lot more polished. And here I'm just showing how I've filled in the hedgerow behind the Aster Orbiter and the Moonliner. I mean, you can see it really helps break up this big white wall that was kind of distracting, and it just makes a softer look and a cleaner look. I mean, it even helps to hide the LED behind the Moonliner a little bit. So I mean, that's really all you do with the foliage is just, you know, use it wherever you want to fill in edges and soften the looks of the thing up, and just clean up the back of the buildings. And with that, that's the end of the video on filling in the gaps. Oh, and of course, once you're done with all the filling of the gaps, you get to paint them. And the paint kit from Olszewski is really good for that. The colors match really well. I mean, you can hardly see the filling in some places. Like, there's a filler here you can't really see. Another one here. And that's the way it should be. But maybe the best advice I can give you is, you know, don't stress out over making the fillers perfect, because there's going to be places that have gaps. Like this one, this radius here in front of the fire station. That's just the way it's molded. It's just going to have a gap there. Don't worry about it. You know, that's as good as it gets. You're going to have little gaps in front of some of the buildings. Here's one in front of the Emporium. You know, so long as they're not very big and you know, and I mean, you'll know if it's noticeable and it bugs you or not. But you know, I've done several of these things, and you know that this is really about as good as it gets without driving yourself crazy. You know, because I mean, you could spend months trying to get this thing perfect, but it's just really not worth it. So you get this good, you know, these kind of gaps going in, and you're good. You're good to go. So, and here's one in front of Plaza Pavilion. You know, that's as good as it gets. Don't sweat it. Have fun with it. And that's it for the Balsa. Well, so there you have it. That's the last in the series of videos on how to build your own coffee table out of the Olszewski Disneyland Main Street collection. Hope you found some of the hints in these videos useful, and it's inspired you to go get all those boxes out of your closet and put this thing together and display it proudly in your home. So thanks for watching, and give me your feedback if you like some of this, and I'll see you soon.